Just a quick note: weather looks like we're going to have temperatures in the mid 60s, perhaps throughout most of the week, other than I think the exception of one day when it will cool off slightly, and I say just slightly. And that weather is expected to continue straight through the upcoming weekend. Just a reminder, of course, our weather update brought to you by the good folks at Mountain Home Auto Ranch. If you need help with that, it's in Mountain Home, right off the highway. 36 right now at 8:43, and also I was able to turn the furnace off the last few days. I don't know if that'll be permanent. On the other hand, we're likely going to get one additional cold shot coming up. And if that's the case, I would recommend that you need to get in touch with the pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric if you're having efficiency problems with your heating unit. The pros at Ramsey's will come out and they'll get the job done right and get it done right the first time. Problem free, cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678 0459. That's 678 0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. We're joined this morning, as we are on Monday mornings, by Randy Stapilus, the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing. Randy, first of all, welcome back to the program.
Good to be here.
Your column over the weekend detailed. I know often we hear stories coming out of the state legislature, and we say to ourselves, that doesn't look like it's a good idea or it's not very transparent. But there is a change made, at least a technical change, that actually appears to be a step in the right direction when it comes to transparency.
I think for the most part it is. It's one of the things that reporters who cover the legislature often see that don't get reflected a lot in news stories that other people have tended not to see is the little moment in between when a vote is the voting on a bill or resolution or something else opens up on the floor of the House, and when the vote is locked in, and there's a little bit of a gap there in between because necessarily you need people to have a little bit of time to punch the buttons to cast their votes at their desk. Sometimes they may be standing up just a seat away, or they turn around and have something in their hands or something like that. You need a minute. Sometimes you will on occasion see a representative running furiously back to their desk to cast the vote because they were talking to somebody elsewhere on the floor. Uh, these things happen. There's a little bit of a gap. But another thing that happens during that time is that they will sometimes take a look and see, oh, so and so voted this way. Well, that's kind of an indicator to me. It may be an indicator that they want to go the same way as so and so, or maybe vote the other way on some occasions. Uh, it's kind of a curious little bit in the system, and there's a little bit of a reflection of it in the Senate where they do voice votes, but uh, fairly often a senator will pass the first time around, and then they get a chance. Then after the initial run of voting is done, they can have a chance to cast their votes after that, after they see how the rest of the chamber is gone. That way, you can see whether, in fact, the vote will pass or fail before you actually cast it, and you'll also be able to see who voted which way. Well, in the House, that's come to an end. There's a little change in the system now that in which the votes aren't being released before they're locked in. So the votes are cast, they're locked in, and then everybody gets to see all at once how the votes turned out. And that makes it a little bit different. In general, I think that's probably a positive thing. I can think of some occasions where it might not be. You could take a particular bill and you could say that well, if everybody had known what was going on, who was voting which way, what the outcome was, the voting might have gone a little bit differently, and depending on where you are, that might be a good thing or a bad thing.
I remember, and I don't think I've not observed it in Boise, so I'm not trying to claim that I have any knowledge of how this happens. But in some other state legislatures that I've visited or that I covered in the past, there would be leaders who would simply, if a vote came up and maybe there'd been no time for anybody to present or read the bill, the leader would nod a head up and down. In other words, telling other members we're voting yes, or side to side we're voting no. This eliminates, as you pointed out, though, a lot of that where you don't know how somebody in leadership is necessarily voting and whether you should follow or not. So you get more of a conscience vote, or at least you raise the possibility of that.
Yeah, and you do get a variation on those kind of leadership cases. Of course, in most cases, most bills, leadership doesn't get that heavily involved, but in certain key ones, especially those where the passing or the killing is a little bit trickier to arrange, uh, then you do see them involved, and you do see them either gesticulating in some way or another, or they might get on the phone to some particular legislator who is holding out in the wrong direction or something like that. You do sometimes see that sort of thing happen too.
You also mentioned in the weekly briefing the opposition from Idaho's Raul Labrador to, well, some people are calling it Ryan Care, others calling it Trump Care. I saw a great editorial cartoon, in fact, earlier this morning where Paul Ryan has actually crossed out the Obamacare and left the M and written in the Trump Care and telling the president, see, it's different. Uh, but Raul Labrador, obviously not pleased with what he's seeing because he thinks it's, I guess, a little too expensive to go this route.
Well, he's part of the Freedom Caucus group in the House that are in opposition to the bill because it does not, in their view, go far enough to repealing what's on the books, and it's the bill is also drawing a lot of opposition in the other direction. People who are concerned about the effects that will have if passed, uh, as it is. It's getting a lot of opposition from both directions, which strictly from that point of view is a little bit reminiscent of what happened when the Affordable Care Act was passed to begin with. There was plenty of opposition in both directions, and it's a very difficult subject to deal with, and that's yeah. He is the first of Idaho's congressional delegation to deliver his stand on it. But I suppose we may be, assuming that a House vote happens sometime soon, we'll probably be hearing something soon from Mike Simpson, one way or the other, on that as well.
And I think that this is in character with Labrador because he's been on record really. I was at the state convention last spring when he said that he had 16 other choices before Donald Trump as the nominee, but would back him as a Republican. But he kept warning throughout the whole process, and even after Election Day, he would support him unless he felt or believed that we were getting off the rails when it came to spending issues.
That was one thing that he said, yeah, and his stance on this particular bill is not unpredictable at all. It's very much in line with what I would have expected that he would do, and my offhand hunch would be that Mike Simpson goes in the other direction, but we'll see. Uh, that's I think there's quite a bit yet to come in the roller coaster on that whole subject, and it'll be interesting to see where a lot of people who haven't yet declared themselves wind up placing themselves on this.
It's 8:51, and Randy Stapilus from Idaho Weekly Briefing joining us this morning on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. We're at 37 on our way perhaps into the mid 60s today. There has been a lot of discussion in the last week about what's taking place on the floor of the Idaho House. That the Senate obviously is a lot quieter. Um, I heard a great nickname the other day for the so-called, and they're being labeled the far right. They're known as the six pack. Uh, and somebody said who supports them, if you shake up a six pack, you know what happens. It's very volatile.
There's kind of a useful metaphor in there, I guess.
But I talked to one of those so-called six-pack members over the weekend, and I got the impression from talking to her, she doesn't feel that she's in any way an extremist or far right, and I don't think is in any way comfortable with that description. And so uh, it, it it seems we can't lump all of them into the same same tent or put them all into the same tent.
Well, it may be a little bit. It's probably a little bit too complicated to shorthand it that easily. And very often, there's a temptation to shorthand a lot of these things, and that can be a mistake. And where she wound up getting that described in that way had to do with the use of a tactic which is called reading the bill that has over the years been used by many different kinds of legislators coming from many different kinds of places. Uh, what reading the bill amounts to is uh, actually forcing a reading of the whole text of a bill, which the Constitution of the state seems to imply, but also provide some allowance for bypassing that if everyone in the chamber agrees. The catch there is that you have to have approval from everyone in the chamber to bypass that reading. Now, in an ideal world, I suppose that whole provision of a third full spoken reading is probably beside the point now. It was written at a time when you needed to be able to slow things down considerably more because you didn't have the kind of communication that you have now. No electronic communication at all, just newspapers that would reach people days after the fact. Uh, so really, as long as the text of it is posted electronically, which as soon as a bill is introduced, its text is posted on the legislative website. There's really no need for a spoken reading of the whole thing at all. I don't think the state would lose anything if it simply dropped that requirement. But it's still there, and from time to time, if somebody wants to either slow things down or draw particular attention to a bill, or has some complaint that they want the chamber to listen to a little bit more seriously, and they figure that they're not being listened to, this is something that they can do. There have been times when either people who are in a minority of one sort or another in the Republican caucus have used it. There have been times when Democrats have used it. And when I say a minority in the Republican caucus, that can come from most any wing of the Republican caucus. It doesn't necessarily have to come from the one that we're talking about here. So yeah, it's kind of a tactic that's been used by a lot of people over the years.
Randy, what's the address, web address for Idaho Weekly Briefing?
It is www.ridenbaugh.com. That's RIDENBAUGH.
I have about 90 seconds. When Elizabeth Warren was disciplined or slapped down by Mitch McConnell in the U.S. Senate, even his fellow Republicans said, from the standpoint of what they call optics, that is how it looks from a public relations standpoint, a bad idea. It does appear, though, that the majority Republicans, their battles so far have mainly dealt with women in their own caucus, number one. And number two, the latest, with someone who's essentially a war hero. I don't know that they'd like to, that they really should be pushing this because in the long run, it could boomerang.
Yeah, the as you say, the optics are kind of problematic because you have to figure what can come back around to you some months down the line, and what will look better and what won't look so good, and how those perceptions can be used. So I think that's true.
I would imagine that there's, at this stage of the game, no real room for, how shall we put it, compromise between these various sides.
It's gotten much more difficult. First, there are enough people now for whom compromise is just plain a dirty word it's become a lot more difficult than it used to be.
Well, I want to thank you much for your time this morning. We look forward to talking again next Monday.
We'll talk to you then.
Randy Stapilus joining us today from Idaho Weekly Briefing on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. And we're coming up on a break. Coming up in the next, coming up, just keep repeating that. Coming up in the next half hour, we're going to be speaking with a woman who's working with an organization that's comprised of grandparents who are taking care of young children, their grandchildren, often because somebody in the family has an issue with drugs, heroin or methamphetamine. That's on the way in just a few minutes. It's about the support network they've created. I do want to tell you about, I just happened to be out for a drive and I passed the offices of Waddell and Reed here in Twin Falls over the weekend. This is a company that's been in business since 1937, one of the oldest investment houses to offer mutual funds. In fact, Waddell and Reed owns and manages two mutual fund families. This is a company that's obviously, well, they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for 80 years. They'll take a planning approach and take a look at each piece of the puzzle for a client. They'll help you build proper expectations. Waddell and Reed will build a plan around your needs or your goals. Waddell and Reed helps people manage money, and Waddell and Reed takes planning personally. News is next from Fox. It's 8:59. We're at 40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com.